Joseph Jonah-Ajonye has committed to the University of Georgia, and we have to talk about what this exactly means for UGA, but also what it means for Oklahoma, because I know there's a lot of OU fans that watch this channel, and you guys might be asking the questions, how did this happen, and where is Oklahoma going to go next? Are we going to potentially land anybody that's elite at the defensive line? The world's potentially falling if you're an Oklahoma fan. And I'm hopefully going to help maybe put some reassurance back into you that Oklahoma is going to be just okay. But guys, before we do that, before we jump into it, go ahead and hit that like and hit the subscribe button. Jump down in the comments below and let me know what you guys think. If you're a Georgia fan, let me know how you feel about the commitment of Joseph Jonah-Ajonye. If you're an Oklahoma fan, I want you guys to tell me something positive about what Todd Bates has done. One, in the transfer portal, but two, on the recruiting trail, because there are some positives that you can pick out. And I think everybody's just being too negative. But let's go ahead and let's jump into it. So the 4-star defensive lineman, Joseph Jonah-Ajonye, has committed to the Georgia Bulldogs. And I don't feel like this was out of the blue. I felt like a lot of people should have braced to themselves and understood that this was coming, because you'd seen the crystal balls kind of flow in for Georgia after he got that offer and then took the visit. Remember, if you remember early when he got that offer, Joseph Jonah-Ajonye talked about how Georgia was his dream school. Now, I will say this, we've had Joseph Jonah-Ajonye on the podcast. Really great dude. We're going to continue to communicate with him at some level during his time at Georgia and while he's recruiting other guys to Georgia, just so Georgia fans can get a little insight to what it's like as a recruit and a player into that program. But the 6'4", 275-pound defensive lineman out of Conroe, Texas, and Oak Ridge High School is a guy that I believe is completely versatile and a guy that actually can do very many things for you when it comes to a defensive line or a defensive end. You heard me say that right, because I've had conversations with Joseph Jonah-Ajonye, and one of the things that kind of stuck out the most to me was he didn't see himself being just an interior defensive lineman, which if you're an Oklahoma fan, you kind of know that's the direction that we would have pushed him, because that's the area that we need improvement. Interior defensive lineman. We have several good defensive ends. You've got Trace Ford, you've got PJ Adebayor, you have our Mason Thomas, who both of those two guys are younger. Trace Ford's probably got 2 years on him. This year, you have Rondell Bothroyd. He's going to be going probably to the NFL draft after this year, but you've got Ethan Downs, Reggie Grimes. So you see this defensive end room for Oklahoma, along with the recent commitment of Wyatt Gilmore. And you can understand why Joseph Jonah-Ajonye might have went to Georgia, because when you go look at the primary recruiter on his recruitment, you see it being Todd Bates. And yeah, Miguel Chavis is listed on there as a secondary, but from just people that I've talked to and heard things around the sort, I mean, it does not sound like Miguel Chavis was really heavily involved in this recruitment, as Georgia had Trey Scott and those guys out there actively recruiting him as a defensive end, not an interior defensive lineman. So you can kind of see where, okay, Georgia's the dream school and they're going to play him at the position that he wants to play. You can kind of see where that would become enticing for a recruit. So yes, Oklahoma lost out on the 4-star, maybe could be a 5-star by the end of the cycle, defensive lineman Joseph Jonah-Ajonye, who I think a lot of people expected potentially to be in the class, because you had heard the conversations about, hey, if him and David Stone and Nigel Smith are in the class, like they're talking about how they could be the best defensive line. And that's true. I mean, that was a conversation that was had, but at the end of the day, Joseph Jonah-Ajonye has to go do what's best for him. And since we're talking about the defensive end and why that was such a big impact, Georgia, after this season, they're not going to have anybody at the defensive end position, right? They need more bodies at that position. So Joseph Jonah-Ajonye has an opportunity to literally come in and either be a 2 to a 3-year starter and probably go to the NFL after 3 years, which is something that he wants to do, right? I mean, a lot of players want to go to the NFL. So kind of talking to him about his recruitment and why in the world was Georgia Tech into this, right? Because I'm like, this isn't common to see Georgia Tech in a recruitment for as high of a level players you are. And really came down to academic. You know, he loves the area in Atlanta. You've got the business moguls out there. With Oregon, right? They just kept really close contact. And that's something you hear a lot about with recruits in Oregon. Oregon likes to maintain those relationships even when a player's committed somewhere else or it looks like they're leaning somewhere else. They want to try to be in the driver's seat or position themselves to be in the driver's seat as much as possible. But ultimately, you saw this recruiting battle towards the end really come down between Georgia and Oklahoma because, well, they just had the best relationships. And, if you're Oklahoma, it sucks to lose him, right? It really does. You really wish you could have been a part of this class, but you lost it to the back to back national champions. So at the end of the day, if you're Oklahoma, just like last year with Jordan Renaud in Alabama, you were pretty much down to the final two schools and you were going up against an elite school and a school that's probably going to have a dynasty when it's all said and done. So you've got to be feeling pretty good because at least you lost the player to the country's best squad, the team that just won their second straight national championship. But now to shift gears exactly, well, no, we'll stay on the Georgia topic for 1 second before we go to Oklahoma. What does this mean for Georgia? Well, Joseph Jonah-Ajonye is going to be able to help Georgia recruit heavily, not only on the defensive line, but recruit the linebacker position as well. And here's what I mean by this. With the constant idea that DeMarcus Riddick might potentially decommit from Georgia and go to either Auburn or Alabama, you would expect that Joseph Jonah-Ajonye is going to be a key piece in the ability to go out there and recruit Justin Williams, the 5-star linebacker, to the University of Georgia. Not to mention that Georgia has gotten Williams Nwaneri on campus recently and is pursuing him heavily. So maybe a guy like Joseph Jonah-Ajonye, who has been around Williams Nwaneri, can now go out there and make a push for him. Now, if you're Oklahoma, the question is, what are you going to do next? What's up at the line or the defensive line position? Well, I'm going to stick with this. You guys know I've had a good relationship with Nigel Smith, and I still believe Nigel Smith will be a part of this class. I've said it all along. I do think Ohio State could potentially be a problem for Oklahoma, but I do think Oklahoma can edge out the victory over Larry Johnson and the Ohio State Buckeyes, especially with what the Ohio State Buckeyes are potentially going to get on the defensive line with like a Dylan Stewart and some of those other 5-star defensive linemen. But then if you're Oklahoma, not only are you potentially looking at that 4-star in Nigel Smith, but you're looking at the 5-star defensive lineman David Stone, who originally hails from Del City, Oklahoma City, whatever you want to call it, right now at IMG Academy. And if he comes to the class, you would expect that the cards are going to continue to fall for Oklahoma, and you're going to see Oklahoma really pick up a lot of momentum. But then you've also got Williams Nwaneri, who I definitely believe could be a part of this class for Oklahoma. And if I had to give you a prediction today with the gun pulled to my head, I'm saying Williams Nwaneri is a part of the class for Oklahoma when it's all said and done. And ultimately, I've told you guys this, and I know some people might not be reporting this just because it's kind of just a guesstimation here at this moment. But if David Stone ends up at the University of Oklahoma, one, I think Jaden Jackson is at Oklahoma. But two, I think he could potentially sway some other defensive players that are IMG Academy or maybe some offensive guys to give Oklahoma another look and maybe give Oklahoma the last shot to land another high-profile defensive player. Additionally, on the edge position, you're going to have the Zena Yumio Azulus, the Daniel Okoyes, and you've already got a Wyatt Gilmore. So when you look at the defensive line position for Oklahoma, yeah, you lost out on your target, Joseph Jonah-Ajonye. But I don't think it's time to hit the panic button just yet because you still have so much on your board that is still available that Oklahoma's future at the defensive line position and what they want to do in this class, it's still there. It's still available. But guys, I want to hear from you. Go ahead, jump down in the comments below, and let me know what you guys' thoughts of whether you're a Georgia fan or an Oklahoma fan, about how you feel about the commitment of Joseph Jonah-Ajonye to the University of Georgia.